Hey everyone. Okay, so I don't have my contacts in, so I cannot really see myself. So sorry if I'm like not looking in like a single direction or like I don't know. But anyway, today I want to talk about something a little bit more personal. This is something that I only really talk about to like my close friends of a couple years or so because I just don't really want people to think that I'm like super crazy or anything like that. I mean, like, which I am to like a certain degree. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about what I remember from my past life, what I remember when I was dead, and yeah. And so, of course, like, I don't remember like every single little thing, but I remember enough that I was able to trace back a lot, confirm a lot of things like historically, and I found a lot of places that I had been to that I like fully remember being in that like no longer exist. So I remember in my last life that I was born somewhere in like the early 1900s. I was born to a very, very wealthy, privileged family in Europe. I think that I lived in England, and I remember a lot about this property. I remember like a lot of the gardens that we had, and like I remember like what a lot of just like the house and like the rooms looked like. I remember like distinctly that like I was a child during these memories because I'm really short, and it's giving very much like familial energy. Like the adults I'm seeing around are like family friends, neighbors, or even extended family like aunts, uncles, like second, third cousins. Like the type of building that I lived on was I think they're called English country homes, or like country estates, like the really old ones. And we had so much land that it was like insane. Like I think that there were like areas that like you could like hunt and do different sports, and I know that like we had horses and all that kind of stuff. I remember what people wore, like when I see like the silhouettes and a lot of like the period clothes, specifically regionally. Like you can't show me like just any like 1900s like outfit and I'll be like, oh my god, like that's so my past life. But like it's very, very specific to like regional styles or like subcultures of the time. And I don't know, yeah, just like the groups that people would be around, like they would dress like each other. I don't want to make this video too long, and I also want to add another disclaimer that like this isn't something that like I just like found out overnight. Like this is something where I had tons and tons of memories, like from when I was really young up through all of like my teen years, and even I still sometimes get them now, but these are just tons of like context clues that I have to really piece together to find out where I'm at. And that includes like analyzing the lighting around me. Something that's interesting is that like now we have mostly like LEDs and fluorescence and like all these other types of lighting, but back then they didn't exist. So you would kind of see the lighting and shadows casted through like oil or gas or fire, or you know, some other form of lighting. And not even just that, but like wallpapers, curtains, like yeah, I would just remember like tons and tons of bits and pieces, and they all made sense with each other. They weren't really like from different time periods and places. Like what I remember makes like a lot of like logical sense, and so like what I'm recounting back to you guys is it's taken me like years to piece things together historically. Anyway, I remember like living there up until I was like maybe like 11 to like 13 or something. And when I was really young, I started doing like vaudeville and like those types of like performances. And I remember that I did do vaudeville in Europe, like especially when I was younger, but at some point, like when maybe a couple years after, I ended up doing traveling circus. And so I've already tried to find like what circus I could have possibly been a part of, but there were hundreds at the time, and some of them did very well, and a lot of them were like didn't. Like they ended up ultimately like failed businesses, or were just kind of like low budget. So it was just like a really popular thing to do at the time, and I didn't know that that's where like the saying came from, like, oh, like that she ran away to the circus, was that was very much like a thing that people did back then. So I'm not sure why I ended up there, or like what circumstances could have led me into doing this, because I came from such a wealthy family. I can't imagine that they would willingly let me do that unless like there was some sort of like disowning, or maybe they happened to like own one of these circuses, or maybe they were supportive, but I'm not necessarily getting the vibe that they were, but they could have been. I ended up doing a traveling circus, and I remember a lot from that time. Like I remember I had a horse. I remember that the fairgrounds like had all the rides up and everything, and the rides look very similar to the ones today. Like we have not really upgraded them to look very different, like structurally or even like usage wise. Back then we had like all the basic like carnival rides that we do now, except like they were made out of like different materials. Like I remember specifically they were made out of like wood and metal and like very like hardy, sturdy thing. I have very specific memories of like working like literally at like that circus, and I know that we would travel because like the layout would kind of change every time. There's this one specific place, like I have never been able to like trace it back, but it's like we set up in the middle of a field like in some town, and there was a spiral brick walkway. Like the stones or the bricks just went into like a really pretty spiral, and there were benches by it, and there was some kind of drainage system. I never knew what it was for years, but I've only been able to kind of click that it's a drainage system now that like I'm an adult, and like I can put like words to those things, and like kind of, I don't know, I can just tell. But it's like this big concrete structure with like, anyway, it's like this big concrete structure with like these like arches, and you can kind of walk into it, and it's like a big tunnel, and there would be these big iron grates at the bottom, and they were always like clogged up with leaves. And yeah, and it was very beautiful, and like even the game tents like were very similar. Like we had similar tarps as now, like they weren't quite like plastic, but like there were multicolored tarps that would be put up like over like when it would be closed down, you know, like it would just go over. But yeah, so I remember specific friends like from that lifetime have come into this one. Kind of like between like doing performance like to like my 20s was kind of a blur. Like there's not too much I remember. I do remember like my first apartment, and I remember I lived on like the top floor of like an old, I don't know, just like those little Victorian houses like that have like those like nooks or whatever, or like those circular or like octagonal shaped things built in where you can sit and look out the window. But I lived in like one of those, and it was specifically the top floor, so I don't know, I was like likely like renting, and I remember that the tile was like red, or like a burgundy red tile, and it was kind of like those Spanish clay tiles, and that was something that I found out was like a really popular like thing to do in kitchens at the time. I don't know, just like in like flooring. But anyway, I remember I lived in a studio, and it was very like interesting shaped. Like there was like a platform to like my next room, and you could see from this room into like the kitchen dining area. But it was honestly so nice, like it was so beautiful. And I remember actually moving in, and they left all the windows open, and they didn't have window screens, and that was something that I did not think about until years later. But in that memory, I remember that I was sweeping up all the leaves that had like wafted in to that top room, and I'm assuming they left the windows open to like keep it like nice and fresh, like have like breeze come through, whatever. But anyway, I remember like cleaning up and like sweeping like dirt and dust and leaves from the floor up there, and there's not really too much I remember after that. I do remember that I had like a table area. I also remember going to people's house or like apartments and houses of the time, so like I remember seeing like a very diverse like group of like living spaces that weren't necessarily my own. There were these types of apartments back then that looked very similar to like modern like kind of like low income apartments. It's like the very white kitchens, like I don't know, it would all be in like one row, like small little nook area, and they look very similar. Just the cabinets are kind of different. Just the cabinets are like a little bit bigger. Like they like back then I don't know, just now they're kind of like compressed, but I remember back then that they were like, they took up a lot more space. There's like so much that I remember, like walking down the street, like there's like a lot of things that will like trigger my memories, like when I, like in this life, if I go out to like an antique store and like I see a chair or like a bathtub, like there was specifically a bathtub that I saw like at the antique store near mine, and it literally triggered something so insane for me. I just locked in on it, and I was like, oh my god, like I haven't seen you in like 100 years type thing, because the bathtubs look totally different. So, and they have a different feeling too, like, and you can't even, in modern day, I don't even think you could really replicate exactly how the light hits off of like those original objects. I do know that at some point, like, I ended up getting a husband, but I don't really remember who he was or like what happened to him, but I'm assuming like either he was wealthy or I was taken care of after, because for some reason, like, I found myself in like a lot of like high up social circles where I was going to like a lot of really big hotels like all around the United States, and so I, for some reason, was definitely traveling, and I do remember like these very specific hotels and like being in them, and I have pictures of them. I know that one of them's like the Ambassador Hotel, like the other one's like the Astor Hotel. There's like a bunch of them, like kind of around like Chicago area to LA to New York and like all of those types of things, and they were very beautiful, like very luxe. Like I know that at that point I had definitely transitioned from doing like circus and vaudeville to like something a little bit more professional, or I was just like looked after. I know like that at some point like I ended up working in entertainment, so I think we're nearing like the 1930s now, so I would have been around like my late 20s, early 30s. I remember being in early television recording studios and sets. So this was something that was like really difficult for me to like figure out, because in my memories I'm literally just in like warehouses, and so I was like, you know, I don't know, that was like a memory that I like could not really piece like where I was, like what I was doing. But over time, like I had just like more and more pieces of like disembodied areas of like maybe this warehouse or like other warehouses that were like really similar and doing studio and film work. So in particular, I remember a lot of sets, and I remember game show sets. So it like I don't really know, like all of like the 1930s TV shows and all that stuff is like lost media because they didn't think that it would be important today. So I haven't been able to like trace back like the set that I specifically saw. But the set that I saw was pink and white, like it was like baby pink, and there were bleachers, like metal bleachers for like a live audience. Like I definitely remember that. And in front of the live audience there was a stage there, but the stage I was looking at was off to the side. It was off to the, like if you're sitting on the bleachers, it was off to the left, and it was of a little, it looked like a little counter or maybe like a little diner. Maybe it's not, but that's just what I see. Like I just see like a countertop, and it's pink and it's pretty thick and bulky, and on the wall there were like, yeah, I think I already mentioned the pink and white checkered tiles or whatever. I remember like a lot of other little things, like I remember like podiums that people would stand on, and they would be just like little like circular cutouts. I don't know, you just stand on them and talk or do whatever. They weren't anything fancy, like they were just like white. This was like a little bit, I think, of an earlier memory, like from maybe like the late 20s, and the reason why I'm able to kind of date it is just like the vibe, and like, because I mean like we all know what 2006 felt like, or we all know what like 2014 felt like, or 2016, you know what I'm saying? Like it's just kind of like the vibe, like how it just felt. But this memory I got when I was 6 years old. I was very little. So like this is in this current life. I heard on the TV about an award show happening, and I was so young, I had never seen depictions of an award show or anything like that. But the moment that I heard that word, that it was going to be, I think it was like the Oscars or something, like my brain, I instantly kind of was like transported for a second to It was a very large Spanish style building, and in the middle of it there was like this huge like planter with like palm trees coming out of it and other tropical plants, and then all around the planter was a booth, so you could like sit along the booth like around this like thing of plants. And then there were like little tables all around, and there were like little velvet like what are the things that like they put up that you have to like open the little velvet string to let somebody through, or like I don't know what those are called, but like the dividers. And on every wall, like to the sides of me and behind me, were bars, and the bars went up all like really high, and like of course they were mirrored and everything, and there were like columns in there, and of course like the columns went up to this beautiful like dome architecture above me. And I still don't know what building this was, like I definitely looked, but anyway, yeah, it was like a beautiful dome thing. And it was also like, I think red tiles, like similarly to the one that I had in my kitchen in my first apartment, but of course they were nicer. There was like a stage directly in front of me, and well, not directly in front of me, I was kind of standing behind like the planter thing, like by the booth, and I could see that there was just like a stage up there. And so I think, based on context, that this was probably an award show that I had gone to, and this is all kind of like in that realm of like entertainment. And I do remember spas, like I remember going to like I just forget the names, like I don't have them up right now, but I remember going to specific spas like in LA and Hollywood. Just this is like around the golden age of Hollywood. But yeah, a lot of the, like, I remember how the windows looked too. In this specific spot, I remember like the windows going all the way from like the ceiling to the floor, and like these like little rectangular strips or whatever. And like there was like a really beautiful pool in there and like all sorts of things. But yeah, so I remember that, and I remember the intro into modernism from like experiencing very old world furniture and architecture, like from the one I grew up in, like the old English countryside home, to seeing just like modern couches, like modern, like you could see a lot of images of like interior design of the 20s and 30s, and it almost kind of looks like it could be from today. Like it's definitely older, but they were kind of getting into like this pre-futuristic type of look when it came to the rich people's interiors. But yeah, so I remember being in like a jazz era like 1930s penthouse. Like this is kind of like nearing the end of my life. Like I didn't live very long. I lived like I don't remember the end of World War II. Like I think that I remember like kind of like the start of it, like the tensions, but I definitely don't remember after. But anyway, I remember being at this penthouse. I don't think that it was mine, but it was beautiful. Like all of the lighting was very warm lighting. There was not a single cold light in that house. And there was like, I don't know what the word would be, but it was like black marble or like black granite or like some kind of sparkly like countertop that they had. And they had it on like a lot of, they had it kind of like everywhere. It was like the floor, the counter, like it was like this sleek, beautiful black. And I remember there were just like some furniture in there that looked kind of funky, like kind of like weird. Like I don't know if you guys know like or you guys definitely do, like the old coffee shop aesthetic. You know, it was kind of like that jazz, like whimsical coffee shop aesthetic that stemmed from early 1920s and 30s, like jazz era type art and architecture and interior design. And that's basically the penthouse like that I'm describing, but it was like very luxurious. Like it was not like cheaply done. Like I remember even the lighting fixtures were like cone shaped and they were black, and they had like a couple of them like around there. It was around a personal bar that they had, and they had it was definitely in a skyscraper too, like because or like some kind of massive apartment. But when you sit like in front of the bar, you can see this massive window to the outside and the rest of the city. So like I'm even thinking the depictions of like the 20s and 30s, like the kind of cold robotic cityscapes, you know, that all goes into like the abstractism and like whatever, like jazz era type thing. That's literally the type of penthouse like that I remember being in and experiencing And it was very, very cozy. It was not like weird or anything, like, because I've seen like pictures of some from the time that were kind of like ugly or like just like not that comfortable looking, but this one was like very nice, like very homey. Like there are just so many other memories like that I have. Like I could literally talk about them for days because it's a whole extra lifetime that I remember, like on top of this one. Getting to like the end part of my life, I do remember that my husband died or something. Like I was just left alone, and I had like this massive house. Like it was so beautiful. Like I should have been more appreciative at the time. Like even though like I had a dead husband, like I should have just been like, damn, like these marble floors though, because in my in my old house that I lived in at the end, it was like the most beautiful like art deco like styled house like in the entire world. Like there were marble like platforms, like there was like a circular marble platform under a skylight that I had, and it was like a dome skylight, like, and I had like a lounge chair type thing, like, and I just remember my memory of it is looking at it just so sad because I was like, fuck, like I'm getting old, I'm at the end of my life, like my husband's dead, like my kid is gone, like I just was feeling so isolated and so just like, you know how like you feel like at the end of the night, like when you're alone in your bed type thing, but it was like extra sad. I was just like consumed by sadness, but like my house was beautiful, and like I'm sure that I was like beautiful as fuck back then. Yeah, and I remember that like that I would keep my bed in like the middle of the rooms because I just had enough space like in my rooms to be able to do that. And just like tons of like curtains and fabrics on the walls, like all sorts of like fun things. Okay, so I remember like shortly around that time, like I died. I honestly think that I died in 1942 because that number always comes up. Like I could have died like at any other point after, like according to like historical record if it's out there, but yeah, that's kind of like around that time that I remember dying. But and also I was really young too, so like yeah, I would have been in my early 40s, late 30s, and I think that I got sick, which is like what ended up doing that for me. But like everything's fine though, because I remember like after I died too, visiting like friends and family. So I remember I got to visit, I don't remember who he was, but I have this memory of visiting a old clown that I worked with like in the circus in vaudeville, and I guess he was still alive after I passed away, and I went, and this might like sound super insane, but like I could see like his house from like a really high up perspective, and it was beautiful. Like he lived somewhere like in the desert or something, and I painted this a long time ago, but the painting has been since lost, unfortunately. But he lived in like a very old kind of like beaten down like little type of house. It was like one story, and he had tons of cars. Like it was almost like junkyard type of vibe, and I love like houses like that, like because I just find them so whimsical and magical. But yeah, he had tons of like old cars that were like beat up and like that he was just like collecting or saving or whatever, and he kept a couch out like outside, and he would sit on that couch and smoke cigarettes and like watch the sunset. And that's when I visited him, was he was smoking a cigarette, and he put on his old clown makeup. Like I remember seeing him in his clown makeup, like that he was just doing it just for like old time's sake, where he was like, fuck it, like nobody lives with me, I'ma just put on my clown garb. And I remember I sat next to him on this couch, and I remember looking at like the wrinkles and how the paint was creasing into them. It was so beautiful because like I could see like the texture of his skin, and like that he was able to live a full life and like age, and yeah, and it was really beautiful. I don't know what his name was. I don't know why I get the vibe like Wilhelm or something like that. He would have been young when I would have been in the circus too, so like we would have, he maybe would have been like 10 or so years older than me, or maybe like 10 or 20. I remember visiting him, and then after I remember visiting what I assume to be are my descendants, because I visited in the 60s again, like at like somebody's birthday. It sounds crazy, but I remember visiting a backyard, and the light was filtering through the trees so beautifully, and it was old party decorations, like it was like little triangles that they would like hang up, and like just like little tablecloth. It was really cute. But yeah, there was a birthday party happening, and there was like a lot of people and family there. And I remember getting to visit inside of the house, and I know that it was around the 60s because there was carpet in the bathroom. And I was literally, the bathroom had a, like, it was like a big vanity mirror that you can see like on all sides. Like I could tell that like my descendants like were left well off, and like that they had like a nice home and like family. And yeah, when I was a little kid in this life, I remember telling my grandma, like, I remember when you guys built the playground in the backyard. And she was like, what? Like, you remember when we built the playground? And I was like, yeah, like I remember when you guys were putting up the posts or whatever. And she was like, no, you weren't even born yet, like you couldn't have seen that. I was like, no, like I did, like I did see you guys put up the wood poles and everything. And she was like, where were you? And I was like, well, I was like, I thought about it and my eyes were in the floor. Like it was like I was in the floor, kind of tilted, watching them build it. Yeah, and they told me that like the playground, that they built it before my dad was born, so I wasn't even born yet. But I definitely remember that happening. There's like a lot of other things like with my memory is like that I remember the day I was born. Like I don't remember like being born obviously, but I remember like being passed around and held like in the palms of people's hands, and it was very distinct. I had a center of gravity that was so small. Like I don't know how to explain it. It's like literally imagine projecting yourself into like a small dog and somebody picking you up. Like your center of gravity isn't going to be like a big person, but I remember being like held and like passed around. And I remember my dad holding me, and I remember the room too. Like there was a whiteboard, but of course I was a baby, so like I wouldn't know like, oh, that's a whiteboard. But when I got older and I remember this, like I could just obviously tell it's a whiteboard, you know. But yeah, there was carpet in that room and there was floral wallpaper. I remember my dad holding me kind of like with my head tilted downwards. I don't know, there was just like a lot of things like that I remember that I definitely should not remember. So like that's definitely why like I've really taken this as like something that is very plausible, that like I definitely had another lifetime if like my memory goes back literally that far. And of course, yeah, I remember like a lot of my childhood. Like I have like an insane long-term memory with like a lot of things. But anyway, yeah, I hope that you guys enjoy. That was kind of just like a lot, so sorry about that. I hope that this is interesting, and that you guys got some enjoyment out of it. But yeah, thanks.